The hydrophone operator aboard the consolidated B-24 Liberator detected it first. A faint, rhythmic pulse rising through the grey Atlantic waters southwest of Iceland. Lieutenant Junior Grade Robert Hopgood pressed his headset tighter against his ears, listening to the distinctive thrum of diesel engines running submerged. May 14, 1943. The crew of this United States Navy Liberator from VP-84 Squadron had been airborne for 6 hours, searching the convoy routes where German U-boats had been savaging Allied merchant shipping for 4 years. Hopgood keyed his intercom. Contact, bearing 270. Submerged diesel signature. The pilot, Lieutenant Commander William Ford, banked the aircraft toward the coordinates. Through the windscreen, nothing but rolling grey swells stretched to the horizon. No periscope wake, no oil slick, no visual indication whatsoever that a German submarine lurked somewhere in those cold depths. The U-boat commander, wherever he was down there, would have heard the Liberator's engines by now. Standard doctrine dictated his response with absolute certainty. He would go deeper, rig for silent running, shut down non-essential systems, wait for the aircraft to exhaust its fuel and depart. This defense had protected German submarines since the war's beginning. Aircraft could search vast ocean areas, but they could only attack what they could see. A U-boat at depth remained invisible, untouchable, safe. Ford brought the Liberator into a standard depth charge attack run, descending to 200 feet above the water. The bombardier readied the Mark 47 depth charges in the bomb bay, but Ford's hand moved to a different release mechanism, one connected to a weapons system so secret that even its name was classified misdirection. The Mark 24 Acoustic Torpedo, officially designated a mine to confuse German intelligence if aircrew were captured, internally called FIDO by the technicians who built it. CTA at approximately the 145 words. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The device weighed 680 pounds, 92 pounds of Torpex explosive, a simple acoustic receiver tuned to detect cavitation noise from propellers, control surfaces that steered toward the loudest sound, maximum speed of 12 knots, maximum depth capability of 300 feet, operational endurance of 10 to 15 minutes before the battery died. On paper, these specifications seemed almost primitive compared to the sophisticated steam-driven torpedoes that submarines fired at surface ships. But FIDO possessed one characteristic that made it absolutely revolutionary. It didn't need to see its target. It only needed to hear it. And German U-boats, running submerged with diesel engines or electric motors, with bilge pumps cycling water, with men breathing and moving through steel corridors, generated a symphony of sound that propagated through seawater for miles, sound that human ears couldn't detect from an aircraft, sound that Allied scientists had learned to convert into guidance signals for an autonomous weapon that would pursue its target relentlessly through 3 dimensions. Ford pressed the release. The Mark 24 dropped from the bomb bay, stabilized by a small parachute that deployed automatically. It struck the water and the parachute detached. The torpedo sank 20 feet, then its motor engaged with a high-pitched whine. Internal gyroscopes stabilized it. The acoustic receiver activated, sweeping through frequencies, searching for the characteristic sounds of machinery operating underwater. Below, the U-boat commander had no idea what had just been released above his position. His hydrophone operator might detect the torpedo's motor eventually, but by then, understanding would arrive too late. The fundamental assumption that had governed submarine warfare since its inception, that depth equals safety, was about to be demolished by a weapon following the U-boat down into the darkness, following the sound of the submarine's own machinery, following inevitably, inexorably, toward detonation. German U-boat doctrine in 1943 rested on principles proven through 4 years of Atlantic combat. These principles had been codified in training manuals, reinforced through operational experience, and internalized by every commander who took a boat to sea. The crash dive represented the submarine's ultimate defense. When aircraft appeared, when destroyers approached, when danger materialized, the submarine submerged. At depth, the U-boat became invisible to visual observation and immune to most weapons that could be delivered from above. The physics supported this doctrine completely. Aircraft bombs followed ballistic trajectories. They fell through air, struck water, and sank at predictable rates while drifting with ocean currents. A submarine that detected an attacking aircraft and crash-dived promptly would be hundreds of yards from the bomb impact point by the time depth charges sank to submarine depth. Even if the aircraft dropped ordnance directly over the swirl marking the dive location, water resistance slowed the sinking charges, while the submarine's momentum carried it away from danger. Depth charges themselves, the primary anti-submarine weapon deployed from both aircraft and surface ships, required precise positioning to kill a submarine. The pressure wave from an underwater explosion dissipated rapidly with distance. A depth charge needed to detonate within 20 feet of a U-boat's pressure hull to guarantee destruction. 40 feet might cause severe damage. Beyond 60 feet, the submarine might escape with minor injuries. The ocean provided three-dimensional space for evasion. A submarine could go deeper, turn sharply, vary speed, employ any combination of maneuvers to increase distance from the attack point. CTA at approximately 145 words. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Training emphasized these survival principles relentlessly. At the U-boat training facilities in Danzig and Pillow, instructors drilled crews on crash dive procedures until the evolution became instinctive. Lookouts were trained to scan the sky continuously, their eyes the primary early warning system against air attack. The moment an aircraft appeared, alarm bells sounded throughout the boat. The bridge watch scrambled down the conning tower hatch. The diving plane's operator pushed his controls to full dive angle. The chief engineer opened negative tank vents and flooded the ballast tanks. In well-trained crews, the entire evolution from surface cruising to periscope depth took 30 to 45 seconds. German submarine construction incorporated design features specifically to enable rapid diving. The Type 7C boat, the most common U-boat variant operating in the Atlantic, could submerge from full-surface cruising to periscope depth in approximately 25 to 30 seconds under emergency conditions. The boat could reach 100 feet depth within 60 seconds if the commander ordered maximum dive speed. These capabilities had been tested in Baltic training areas and proven in Atlantic combat. Countless U-boats had survived air attacks by diving before aircraft could release weapons. The operational record reinforced confidence in these defensive procedures. In 1941 and 1942, U-boats operating in the Central Atlantic, beyond the range of land-based aircraft, enjoyed relative freedom from air attack. Boats transiting the Bay of Biscay faced greater air threat, but even there, prompt diving usually ensured survival. The Matox radar detector, introduced in summer 1942, provided early warning when aircraft equipped with ASV Mark II radar approached, giving U-boats several minutes to dive safely before the aircraft closed to visual range. By spring 1943, this tactical framework had begun failing catastrophically. Allied aircraft equipped with centimetric radar could detect surfaced U-boats from beyond visual range and approach without warning. The Matox detector couldn't sense these new radar frequencies. U-boats were being caught on the surface with insufficient time to dive, but even this technological disadvantage didn't invalidate the fundamental defensive principle. If the U-boat could dive, even in the final seconds before attack, depth still provided protection. The commander, who kept his nerve and executed emergency procedures, could still save his boat and crew. What German commanders didn't know, what intelligence services hadn't detected, what captured prisoners hadn't revealed, was that Allied scientists had eliminated the very foundation upon which this defensive doctrine rested. The assumption that weapons dropped from aircraft followed ballistic trajectories, the belief that ordnance couldn't pursue a maneuvering target underwater, the certainty that depth provided sanctuary. The Mark 24 acoustic torpedo existed in a classification category that transcended normal military secrecy. Standard classified weapons appeared in technical manuals with restricted distribution. Officers with appropriate clearances received briefings on capabilities and employment procedures. Aircrews trained with inert practice versions before deploying live ordnance in combat. The normal infrastructure of military logistics, training, and operational integration applied even to highly sensitive weapons systems. FIDO bypassed all of this. The weapon was never called a torpedo in official documentation or radio communications. The designation Mark 24 mine appeared on loading manifests and combat reports. Aircrew referred to it as the mine in debriefings and after-action reports. This misdirection served a specific purpose. If German intelligence intercepted communications mentioning mine deployment from aircraft, they would waste analytical effort trying to understand an aerial mining campaign that didn't exist. If aircrew were captured after dropping FIDO, their interrogators would focus on the wrong weapon system entirely. CTA at approximately 145 words. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Development had occurred at the Harvard Underwater Sound Laboratory beginning in December 1941, just weeks after the United States entered the war. The concept was straightforward. Submarines operating underwater generated noise. Propellers created cavitation bubbles that collapsed with distinctive acoustic signatures. Diesel engines transmitted vibrations through the hull. Electric motors produced electromagnetic fields that induced currents in seawater. Machinery of every type, pumps and generators and ventilation systems, created sound that propagated efficiently through water. The technical challenges involved converting passive detection into active guidance. The torpedo needed an acoustic receiver sensitive enough to detect submarine machinery noise from tactically useful distances. It needed signal processing to distinguish target noise from ocean background sounds like wave action, marine life, or the torpedo's own motor. It needed a guidance system that could translate acoustic bearing into control surface commands. And critically, it needed all of this in a package small enough to be carried by patrol aircraft and reliable enough to function after being dropped from altitude into seawater. Western Electric Company received the development contract. Engineers designed a passive acoustic receiver using crystal transducers that converted sound pressure into electrical signals. The signals passed through filters tuned to eliminate frequencies outside the range of typical submarine machinery. An amplifier boosted the filtered signal. The amplified output drove a servo mechanism connected to the torpedo's rudder. If the acoustic signature was stronger on the port receiver, the rudder turned left. Starboard signature dominance turned the rudder right. The torpedo simply followed the loudest sound. The weapon had severe limitations that prevented it from being a universal solution. Maximum speed of 12 knots meant it couldn't chase a surfaced U-boat running at maximum diesel speed of 17 knots. The acoustic receiver couldn't distinguish friendly ships from enemy submarines, making FIDO dangerous to deploy near Allied vessels. Battery endurance of 10 to 15 minutes limited the pursuit range. If the U-boat detected the torpedo early and conducted aggressive evasive maneuvers, FIDO might exhaust its power before achieving intercept. But against a U-boat that had crash-dived and was running submerged at 7 to 8 knots, FIDO became extraordinarily effective. The submarine commander had no reason to conduct violent evasive maneuvers because he didn't know an acoustic weapon was pursuing him. His hydrophone operator might eventually detect the torpedo's motor, but identification would come late in the engagement. By the time the crew realized something was following them, the torpedo would be close enough that evasion became difficult or impossible in the confined maneuvering space at depth. Production began in March 1943 at Western Electric's Point Breeze plant near Baltimore. Initial output was limited. The first operational units were delivered to Navy patrol squadrons in late April 1943. No training launches occurred before combat deployment. Aircrew received verbal briefings on employment procedures. Load the weapon in the bomb bay like any other ordnance. When attacking a submerged contact, fly the standard approach pattern. Release the Mark 24 when over the estimated target position. The parachute would deploy automatically. After water entry, the torpedo would activate and begin its autonomous search. The aircraft should then immediately leave the area to avoid providing an acoustic target for the torpedo to follow. Security protocols emphasized that aircrew were never to mention the acoustic homing capability in radio transmissions. Combat reports would describe FIDO employment using the cover terminology mine or special weapon. If forced down at sea or captured, aircrew were instructed to describe the Mark 24 as an improved depth bomb with enhanced sinking rate. The true guidance mechanism was to remain secret under all circumstances, even under interrogation, even under threat. The longer German intelligence remained ignorant of acoustic torpedoes, the more effective FIDO would remain. The first confirmed kill using the Mark 24 occurred on May 14, 1943. The target was U-640, a Type 7C boat commanded by Oberleutnant zur See Karl-Heinz Nagel. The submarine had departed Brest on April 28 for its first combat patrol, assigned to operate southwest of Iceland against convoys on the North Atlantic routes. U-640 carried a crew of 48 men, most of them on their first operational deployment. Nagel himself had received his command just weeks earlier after completing the standard commander qualification program. The engagement began at 11:43 in the morning. The Liberator from VP-84, piloted by Lieutenant Commander William Ford, had been searching assigned patrol sectors when the hydrophone operator detected submerged diesel signature. The contact was classified as probable U-boat, based on acoustic characteristics and geographic location. Ford maneuvered the aircraft over the estimated position and released one Mark 24 from an altitude of 250 feet. The weapon functioned exactly as designed. Parachute deployed, water entry clean, motor activation at prescribed depth. Acoustic receivers acquired the target signature immediately. U-640 was running at periscope depth, speed approximately 7 knots, maintaining course toward patrol station. The torpedo's guidance system locked onto the diesel engine noise and propeller cavitation. Pursuit phase began. Aboard U-640, routine patrol conditions prevailed. The boat had been submerged since dawn to avoid air detection. The crew was conducting normal watch rotations. The hydrophone operator monitored passive sonar, listening for convoy propeller noise or escort vessel screws. The electric motors ran quietly in cruising mode. Battery charge remained adequate. No emergency conditions existed, no reason for heightened alertness beyond standard wartime vigilance. The first indication of threat came approximately 8 minutes after FIDO entered the water. The hydrophone operator reported high-pitched motor noise bearing astern. The signature didn't match typical escort vessel propellers. Too high frequency, too steady. Moving through the water at a speed inconsistent with surface ship maneuvering, Nagel ordered the boat to turn 30 degrees starboard and increase speed to 9 knots. Standard evasion for contacts that couldn't be immediately classified. The torpedo turned to follow. Its acoustic receivers detected the target's new bearing, and the guidance system adjusted accordingly. The 12-knot maximum speed gave FIDO sufficient overtake velocity against the 9-knot target. Range decreased steadily. 4 minutes, 3 minutes, 2 minutes. Nagel ordered full ahead on electric motors and hard left rudder. The sudden maneuver generated transient noise as the boat heeled through the turn. The increased motor load created stronger acoustic signature. FIDO's receivers tracked the enhanced signal perfectly. The torpedo followed U-640 through the evasive turn without difficulty. By now, Nagel understood something was pursuing his boat. The hydrophone operator reported the contact maintaining constant bearing despite the maneuver. Range decreasing continuously, whatever was following them was homing on their position through some mechanism Nagel couldn't identify. He ordered the electric motors shut down completely, rig for silent running. Perhaps if they eliminated all noise, the pursuer would lose contact. U-640 went quiet. Motors stopped. Auxiliary systems secured. The crew froze in position, minimizing any movement that might transmit sound through the hull. The submarine began to drift with residual momentum, slowly losing way through the water. In the absolute silence, the crew could hear their own breathing, their own heartbeats, the creaks and groans of the pressure hull adjusting to depth. The torpedo's acoustic signature continued approaching. FIDO was running on its own motor, generating sound that U-640's hydrophones could track clearly. But the torpedo wasn't chasing its own acoustic reflection. It was still homing on residual noise from the U-boat, bilge pumps that couldn't be completely secured, slight sounds from the crew despite their efforts at silence, perhaps even the sound of water moving past the drifting hull. Final bearing steady, range closing. The hydrophone operator's voice rose in pitch as he reported continuous updates to Naval: 100 meters, 75 meters, 50 meters. Naval had no countermeasures available, no decoys to deploy, no weapons to engage the pursuer, no speed to evade. The boat was dead in the water, drifting, waiting. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Mark 24 struck U-640's stern at 11:56, 13 minutes after water entry. The 92 pounds of Torpex explosive detonated against the after torpedo room bulkhead. The pressure hull ruptured instantly. The after compartment flooded in seconds. The pressure wave propagated through the entire length of the boat, crushing equipment and rupturing additional compartments. U-640 dropped toward the bottom stern first, flooding progressively from aft to forward. The crew had no time to react, no possibility of escape. The submarine sank in approximately 400 fathoms of water. All 48 men died. Within 72 hours of U-640's destruction, 2 more U-boats died to acoustic torpedoes. On May 15th, U-176 was sunk by a Mark 24, dropped from a Navy Catalina flying boat operating from Trinidad. The Type 9C boat, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Rainer Dirksen, had been returning to base after patrol when detected southeast of Cuba. The torpedo tracked the submarine through multiple evasive turns before detonating amidships. All 53 crew members perished. On May 16th, U-266 fell to FIDO in the Bay of Biscay. An RAF Coastal Command Sunderland flying boat from No. 10 Squadron Royal Australian Air Force detected the Type 7C boat running submerged approximately 120 miles west of Cape Finisterre. The Mark 24 pursued U-266 for 11 minutes before detonation destroyed the after section of the pressure hull. The boat sank with all 48 crew, 3 U-boats in 3 days. The kills occurred in widely separated geographic areas: Caribbean, Mid-Atlantic, Bay of Biscay, different aircraft types, different patrol squadrons, different tactical situations. But the outcome remained identical: submarine detected while submerged, weapon released from aircraft, submarine destroyed, no survivors. The operational reports, carefully scrubbed of any reference to acoustic homing, described successful attacks using special weapons or mines against submerged contacts. Allied intelligence officers reading these reports in Washington and London understood the significance immediately. FIDO worked. The weapon functioned reliably across different ocean conditions, different water temperatures, different acoustic environments. The guidance system acquired targets consistently. The warhead produced kills when detonation occurred near the pressure hull. Production schedules were immediately accelerated. Western Electric received orders to maximize output. The Point Breeze facility expanded production lines. Additional manufacturing capacity was contracted at General Electric plants. By June 1943, production reached approximately 200 units per month. By autumn, output exceeded 400 monthly. Every available Mark 24 was being rushed to operational squadrons as quickly as quality control inspectors could certify the weapons. Deployment expanded beyond the initial Navy patrol squadrons. RAF Coastal Command began receiving FIDO in June 1943. The security protocols remained absolute. British aircrew received the same cover story. The weapon was designated an advanced mine. The acoustic homing capability was never mentioned in briefings or operational documents accessible to personnel without specific clearance. Even maintenance crews handling the weapons were told only that these were special depth bombs requiring careful handling and secure storage. The effectiveness exceeded even optimistic projections. Early estimates suggested FIDO might achieve a 10% kill rate against submerged U-boats. Actual combat results showed success rates approaching 20 to 30%, depending on tactical conditions. When the acoustic torpedo acquired a target and began pursuit, the probability of kill rose to approximately 50%. These figures represented revolutionary improvement over conventional depth charges, which achieved kills in fewer than 5% of attacks against submerged submarines. The psychological impact on Allied aircrew was profound and immediate. For 2 years, patrol aircraft had conducted endless searches across vast ocean areas, occasionally detecting U-boats, rarely achieving kills. The frustration of watching a submarine crash dive seconds before attack range was universal among patrol crews. U-boats seemed to vanish into protective depth, untouchable, surviving to attack convoys another day. FIDO changed the tactical equation completely. Now, when an aircraft detected a U-boat and the submarine dived, the crew had a weapon that could follow. The moment of greatest frustration, watching the swirl mark the dive location while the submarine escaped, had been transformed into the moment of greatest opportunity. The dive no longer guaranteed survival. It simply delayed the inevitable, as the torpedo pursued the target through all 3 dimensions. Technical debriefings with aircrew revealed consistent observations about FIDO employment. The weapon required careful handling during loading and pre-flight inspection. The acoustic receivers were sensitive instruments that could be damaged by rough handling or impact. The battery needed to be fresh. Storage time was limited. Once loaded aboard aircraft, FIDO needed to be used within specific time windows or returned to depot for battery replacement. The release procedure demanded precision. The aircraft needed to be at correct altitude, approximately 200 to 300 feet, to ensure the parachute deployed properly. Speed had to be controlled to prevent the weapon from tumbling during release. The target position needed to be estimated accurately because FIDO couldn't search wide areas. It could only pursue targets within its acoustic detection range, approximately 400 to 600 yards depending on conditions. But when employed correctly against suitable targets, FIDO demonstrated devastating effectiveness. U-boats running submerged at standard patrol speeds became vulnerable prey. The submarine's own machinery, the very systems that provided propulsion and life support, generated the acoustic signature that guided their destruction. The diesel engines Germans had trusted for 4 years of successful operations had become homing beacons for autonomous weapons that never tired, never lost concentration, never gave up pursuit until battery exhaustion or target destruction. German intelligence remained completely unaware of the acoustic torpedo's existence through summer and autumn 1943. Interrogations of captured Allied aircrew produced no information about the weapon. The cover designation as a mine successfully misdirected German analytical effort. When U-boats were lost in areas where aircraft had been reported, German operational analysis assumed conventional depth charge attacks had achieved lucky hits. The possibility that a fundamentally new weapon was being employed never appeared in intelligence assessments during this critical period. The pattern became statistically anomalous by July 1943. U-boats were being lost at significantly higher rates than conventional depth charge effectiveness could explain. More critically, boats were being destroyed while submerged, in situations where standard defensive doctrine should have ensured survival. The tactical circumstances didn't make sense according to established understanding of anti-submarine warfare. Kapitänleutnant Klaus Bargston, serving on the operations staff at U-boat headquarters in Berlin, was among the first to recognize the discrepancy. His responsibility included analyzing combat reports and loss circumstances to identify tactical patterns and recommend doctrine modifications. Throughout summer 1943, Bargston reviewed increasingly troubling data. U-758, lost on June 8 west of Cape Ortegal. Last reported position showed the boat submerged, conducting evasion from aircraft contact. No distress signal, no survivors, no debris field located despite extensive search by other U-boats in the area. The boat simply disappeared after reporting aircraft overhead and emergency dive. U-951. Destroyed on July 7 northeast of the Azores. The Type 7C boat, commanded by Oberleutnant zur See Kurt Ritterbusch, had radioed detection of patrol aircraft and was executing crash dive when transmissions ceased. A nearby U-boat heard distant underwater explosion, approximately 12 minutes after U-951's last transmission. Search of the area found oil slick and debris, but no survivors from the 46-man crew. U-135 sunk on July 15 south of the Azores. Korvettenkapitän Friedrich Hermann Praetorius commanded this Type 7C boat on its 6th war patrol. Radio intercepts indicated U-135 detected aircraft, began emergency dive, and was conducting evasive maneuvers when destroyed. Again, the time interval between detection and destruction exceeded what depth charge attacks typically produced. Conventional weapons dropped while the submarine was diving would have taken 30 to 40 seconds to reach submarine depth. U-135 survived several minutes before destruction, suggesting the weapon continued pursuing the boat after initial attack. The temporal pattern was impossible to explain using conventional weapons physics. Depth charges followed ballistic trajectories. Once released from aircraft, their path was determined by velocity, altitude, and gravity. They couldn't adjust course. They couldn't pursue evasive targets. They couldn't hunt submarines through three-dimensional maneuvering. Yet U-boats were being destroyed after the submarines had clearly begun evasive action, sometimes several minutes after initial aircraft attack. Bargston compiled statistics showing submarine survival rates against air attack had declined precipitously beginning in May 1943. Prior to May, approximately 70 to 80% of U-boats that successfully crash-dived before aircraft released weapons survived the attack. After May, survival rates dropped to approximately 50 to 60%. This 20 to 30% decrease in survival represented hundreds of additional casualties over the 6-month period from May through October. Geographic analysis revealed another anomaly. Losses were occurring across all operational areas: North Atlantic, Central Atlantic, Caribbean, South Atlantic, Bay of Biscay, Mediterranean approaches. No theatre showed immunity. Whatever was killing U-boats operated effectively across vastly different ocean conditions, water temperatures, acoustic environments, and tactical situations. This universality suggested Allied forces had deployed a weapon system that wasn't dependent on specific environmental conditions. The depth at which boats were being destroyed provided another clue that something fundamental had changed. Several loss reports from nearby submarines described hearing underwater explosions at depths exceeding 150 meters. Conventional depth charges dropped from aircraft rarely functioned deeper than 100 meters. The hydrostatic pressure fuses that triggered detonation at preset depths weren't reliable at extreme depth, yet boats were being destroyed well below the effective range of known Allied weapons. Bargston presented his analysis to Konteradmiral Eberhard Gott, Chief of U-boat operations, in August 1943. The briefing included detailed statistics, loss circumstances, and temporal patterns. Bargston's conclusion was unambiguous. Allied forces had deployed a new weapon system that could pursue submerged U-boats and detonate in proximity to maneuvering targets at depths conventional weapons couldn't reach. Gott authorized investigation into possible explanations. Perhaps the Allies had developed improved depth charges with deeper settings. Perhaps new fusing mechanisms allowed weapons to detonate closer to targets. Perhaps multiple aircraft were coordinating attacks, saturating areas with enough ordnance that probability alone explained increased kill rates. Each hypothesis was examined and found insufficient to explain the observed data. The acoustic torpedo possibility was considered and initially dismissed. German scientists had conducted theoretical studies on acoustic homing weapons in the late 1930s. The technical challenges had appeared insurmountable. Distinguishing target noise from ocean background sounds required signal processing beyond available technology. Creating miniaturized acoustic receivers sensitive enough for tactical use exceeded German manufacturing capabilities. Packaging guidance systems, receivers, warheads, and propulsion into a weapon small enough for aircraft delivery seemed impossible given the engineering constraints. If German scientists, with access to substantial research funding and advanced industrial capacity, had concluded acoustic torpedoes were impractical, how could the Allies have solved the same problems? The British industrial base was under constant bombardment. American entry into the war was recent. The scientific talent required for such revolutionary development should have been obvious through intelligence channels. Yet new indicators suggested Allied acoustic torpedo programs existed. The alternative explanation, that Allied depth-charge tactics had simply improved through training and experience, seemed more plausible despite not fully explaining the statistical anomalies. Perhaps patrol aircraft were achieving better target position estimation. Perhaps new aiming techniques reduced weapon dispersion. Perhaps operational experience had refined attack procedures in ways that increased effectiveness without requiring revolutionary new weapons. This rationalization allowed German operational commands to avoid confronting an uncomfortable possibility that the Allies had achieved another technological breakthrough that rendered existing U-boat defensive doctrine obsolete. The shock of discovering centimetric radar in February 1943 was still fresh. The psychological impact of learning the Allies possessed detection capabilities. German science had declared impossible continued to influence strategic thinking. Accepting that another revolutionary weapon existed, one that eliminated the fundamental defensive advantage of depth, required acknowledging technological inferiority that German command staffs were reluctant to admit. The German Navy's formal acknowledgement of Allied acoustic torpedoes didn't occur until January 1944, 8 months after FIDO's combat debut. The confirmation came not from captured weapons or technical intelligence, but from interrogation of Allied aircrew shot down over occupied Europe. A Royal Air Force Coastal Command crew, forced down after attacking a U-boat in the Bay of Biscay, eventually revealed under interrogation that acoustic homing torpedoes had been operational since May 1943. The interrogation transcripts, preserved in captured German naval archives, reveal the psychological impact of this disclosure. The German intelligence officer conducting the questioning initially disbelieved the information, assuming it was deliberate misinformation designed to create false threat perceptions. Only after detailed technical questioning, during which the aircrew described weapon characteristics consistent with acoustic homing principles, did the interrogator recognize he was receiving genuine intelligence. Korvettenkapitän Günther Hessler, Admiral Dönitz's son-in-law and chief of operations at U-boat command, received the interrogation report in late January 1944. His response, documented in headquarters war diary entries, reflected a mixture of vindication and despair. Vindication because the unexplained loss patterns finally had explanation. Despair because the explanation confirmed that U-boats had been fighting for 8 months against a weapon they couldn't detect and couldn't evade using established defensive procedures. Hessler immediately ordered comprehensive review of all U-boat losses. Since May 1943, where circumstances suggested aircraft attack against submerged targets, the analysis identified at least 37 boats that had almost certainly been destroyed by acoustic torpedoes. The true number was likely higher, but many losses occurred without witnesses or detailed circumstantial evidence that would allow definitive classification. 37 confirmed kills represented approximately 1,800 men, 1,800 submariners who had followed doctrine precisely, who had crash-dived when aircraft appeared, who had conducted evasive maneuvers correctly, who had done everything their training demanded, and who had died anyway because their defensive procedures were obsolete against weapons whose existence they didn't know about. The tactical implications were devastating. Every principle of submarine defense that had been proven through 4 years of combat operations had been invalidated by a single technological innovation. Diving no longer guaranteed safety, depth no longer provided sanctuary, evasive maneuvers no longer ensured survival. The fundamental assumption that aircraft weapons followed ballistic trajectories had been overturned by autonomous weapons that pursued targets through 3-dimensional space. German scientists immediately began studying countermeasures. The options were limited and unsatisfactory. Acoustic decoys that generated noise louder than the submarine itself might deceive homing torpedoes, drawing them away from the actual target. But developing effective decoys required understanding the acoustic frequencies FIDO's receivers used, information German intelligence didn't possess. Manufacturing and deploying decoys in quantity would take months, even after successful development. Enhanced hydrophone systems that could detect acoustic torpedoes at longer ranges might provide earlier warning, giving U-boat commanders more time to conduct evasive maneuvers. But detection alone didn't solve the fundamental problem. The torpedo could still pursue the submarine. Unless the U-boat could outrun the weapon, which Type 7 and Type 9 boats couldn't accomplish while submerged, early warning simply extended the duration of inevitable pursuit. Tactical doctrine modifications were implemented immediately. U-boats were instructed that upon detecting high-pitched motor noise consistent with acoustic torpedo pursuit, they should execute emergency deep dive to maximum depth, shut down all machinery, including propulsion, and drift silently. The theory was that eliminating acoustic signature might cause the torpedo to lose contact and exhaust its battery while searching. This procedure offered some theoretical possibility of survival, but required extraordinary discipline and precise execution. The crew had to overcome instinctive responses to flee from danger, instead going quiet and deep while a weapon closed on their position. The psychological burden of waiting silently while death approached was immense. Many commanders found the procedure almost impossible to execute under actual combat stress. The historical record contains several documented cases where this tactic succeeded. U-boats detected pursuing torpedoes, went completely silent, and survived as FIDO exhausted its battery searching for acoustic signature that had disappeared. But these successes represented a small minority of engagements. Most encounters ended with the torpedo achieving detonation before the U-boat could eliminate sufficient acoustic signature to break contact. Production constraints limited FIDO deployment through 1944. Western Electric manufactured approximately 4,000 Mark 24 torpedoes during the entire war. This represented substantial quantity for a specialized weapon, but remained far below production numbers for conventional depth charges or other anti-submarine ordnance. Patrol squadrons received priority allocation, with limited numbers going to escort carriers and surface vessels equipped with experimental acoustic torpedo launch systems. The selectivity of deployment actually enhanced FIDO's effectiveness. Because the weapon remained relatively scarce, it was employed primarily against high-confidence submerged contacts, where probability of kill justified expending the specialized ordnance. This targeting discipline meant FIDO's operational success rate remained high throughout the war. The weapon wasn't wasted on marginal contacts or speculative attacks. Allied security protocols maintained absolute classification of acoustic homing capability until war's end. German knowledge of FIDO's existence, confirmed in January 1944, didn't translate into understanding of how the weapon functioned. Intelligence services knew acoustic torpedoes existed. They understood the weapons homed on submarine-generated noise, but they lacked technical details about receiver sensitivity, frequency response, signal processing, or guidance algorithms that would have enabled effective countermeasure development. This information asymmetry persisted because Allied forces never lost a FIDO to enemy capture. The weapons that failed to achieve kills sank into deep ocean waters where recovery was impossible with 1940s technology. No unexploded Mark 24 was ever recovered by German forces. No intact specimen could be examined and reverse-engineered the way the H-2S magnetron from Rotterdam had been analyzed in February 1943. The psychological toll of fighting against acoustic torpedoes appeared consistently in post-war interrogations of U-boat survivors. Allied intelligence officers, conducting detailed debriefings at facilities like Fort Hunt and the London Cage, documented a specific form of demoralization that differed from the general war weariness affecting German forces by 1944 and 45. Oberleutnant Sir C. Herbert Werner, who survived the war after serving on multiple U-boats, including command of U-415, described the transformation in his post-war memoir. The ocean itself became our enemy more than the Allied forces above it. We could fight destroyers, we could evade aircraft if given warning, but we could not fight weapons that pursued us into the depths, using our own machinery noise as guidance. Every sound our boat made, every necessary operation of pumps or motors, became a potential death sentence. This statement captured the existential horror of acoustic torpedo warfare. U-boat crews had always understood their service carried extreme risk. The 75% casualty rate among German submariners represented the highest loss percentage of any military service in the war. But those losses had previously occurred within a framework where skill, training, and proper execution of doctrine provided some measure of control over fate. FIDO eliminated that framework. A commander could execute perfect tactical procedures, maintain exemplary boat discipline, demonstrate exceptional seamanship, and still die because his diesel engines generated sound that propagated through seawater to guide autonomous weapons his hydrophone operator detected too late to evade. The sense of control, the belief that competence mattered, the confidence that following doctrine provided protection, all dissolved when confronted with weapons that pursued targets through the very medium that submarines relied upon for concealment. The statistical analysis of U-boat losses in the final 2 years of the war reveals acoustic torpedoes' contribution to the campaign's outcome. Of approximately 470 U-boats destroyed by Allied action from May 1943 through May 1945, at least 68 were confirmed kills achieved by FIDO. The actual number was certainly higher, possibly approaching 100 boats, but conservative classification standards required specific evidence before attributing losses to acoustic torpedoes. 68 confirmed kills represented approximately 3,400 men. These casualties were concentrated among experienced crews operating in the most critical phases of the Atlantic campaign. The Type 7C boats that formed the backbone of U-boat operations were particularly vulnerable to FIDO because their relatively modest underwater speed, approximately 7 to 8 knots, gave them no capability to outrun pursuing torpedoes. The Type 9 boats, with slightly better underwater performance, showed marginally higher survival rates against acoustic torpedo attack, but the difference was insufficient to affect strategic outcomes. Whether a U-boat could make 7 knots or 9 knots while submerged mattered little against weapons that could pursue at 12 knots for 10 to 15 minutes. The mathematics remained inexorable. FIDO closed the distance. Detonation followed. Geographic distribution of acoustic torpedo kills showed concentration in areas where Allied air coverage was most intense. The Bay of Biscay transit routes, where U-boats had to pass through relatively confined waters to reach and return from Atlantic operating areas, accounted for approximately 25% of FIDO kills. The approaches to Gibraltar, another geographic choke point, contributed another 15%. The Central Atlantic convoy routes provided the remaining 60%. The temporal distribution revealed FIDO's impact peaked during summer and autumn 1943, when Allied air coverage expanded dramatically and U-boat defensive doctrine hadn't yet adapted to acoustic torpedo threat. Monthly kill rates using FIDO reached 8 to 10 boats during July through October 1943. After German forces confirmed acoustic torpedo existence in January 1944 and implemented countermeasure procedures, kill rates declined to 4 to 6 boats monthly through the remainder of the war. This decline reflected both German tactical adaptations and reduced U-boat operational tempo. By mid-1944, most surviving boats spent majority of patrol time submerged, surfacing only briefly to snorkel and recharge batteries. This operational pattern reduced exposure to aircraft detection and consequently reduced opportunities for FIDO employment. U-boats that couldn't be detected couldn't be attacked, regardless of weapon sophistication. The technical evolution of acoustic torpedoes continued through war's end. The Mark 24 Mod 1, introduced in late 1944, featured improved acoustic receivers with better sensitivity and enhanced signal processing that reduced false targets from marine life and ocean ambient noise. Maximum pursuit duration increased to approximately 20 minutes through improved battery design. These incremental improvements maintained FIDO's effectiveness even as German countermeasures became more sophisticated. American development of the Mark 27 acoustic torpedo, designed for launch from surface vessels and submarines rather than aircraft, expanded the tactical applications of acoustic homing technology. Though the Mark 27 saw limited operational use before war's end, it demonstrated that acoustic guidance principles could be applied across multiple platforms and tactical scenarios. The technology that had proven so effective against U-boats could be adapted to threaten any submarine operating underwater. The British developed parallel acoustic torpedo systems, including modifications to existing Mark 24 designs, optimized for Royal Navy operational requirements. Coordination between American and British development programs, facilitated by the technical exchange relationships established early in the war, ensured that advances in acoustic homing technology were rapidly shared and incorporated across both nations' arsenals. Post-war technical analysis by both Allied and German experts confirmed that FIDO represented one of the most cost-effective weapons developed during World War II. The production cost of approximately $4,000 per Mark 24 torpedo was modest compared to the value of U-boats destroyed, each representing investment of millions of Reichsmarks and 9 months construction time. The exchange ratio, measured purely in economic terms, strongly favored the acoustic torpedo. More significantly, FIDO contributed to the psychological collapse of U-boat operations in ways that exceeded its direct kill statistics. The knowledge that diving no longer guaranteed safety, that depth could not be relied upon for protection, that evasion might prove impossible against weapons pursuing through 3 dimensions, fundamentally undermined the confidence that submarine crews required to function effectively in combat. The weapon killed boats, but it also destroyed the certainty that had sustained submarine operations through 4 years of brutal Atlantic warfare. The Mark 24 FIDO Acoustic Torpedo disappeared from operational service within months of Germany's surrender in May 1945. The weapons remaining in inventory were either expended in post-war testing or disposed of through deep ocean dumping. The technology they embodied, however, established principles that would define submarine warfare for the remainder of the 20th century and beyond. Every modern anti-submarine torpedo traces conceptual lineage to FIDO's acoustic homing guidance system. The sophistication has advanced exponentially. Contemporary weapons employ digital signal processing, multiple acoustic frequencies, active sonar transmission combined with passive listening, artificial intelligence for target classification, and propulsion systems enabling speeds exceeding 50 knots. But the fundamental principle remains unchanged. Detect the target through sound, follow that sound, detonate in proximity. The Cold War submarine warfare that dominated naval strategy from 1945 through 1991 existed in the shadow of FIDO's demonstrated effectiveness. Soviet submarine designers, studying captured German records and Allied technical reports, understood that acoustic detection and homing weapons had permanently changed underwater combat. American and British submarine forces, drawing on their own World War II experience, knew that survival required minimizing acoustic signature across all operational regimes. The massive investment in submarine quieting technology that characterized Cold War naval competition directly reflected lessons learned from acoustic torpedo warfare in the Atlantic. Submarines became progressively quieter through improved propeller design, sound-damping mounting systems for machinery, specialized hull coatings that absorbed sonar energy, and propulsion systems optimized for silent running. Every innovation aimed at reducing the acoustic signature that FIDO had exploited so effectively in 1943. The German U-boat crews who survived the war carried the psychological impact of acoustic torpedo warfare for the remainder of their lives. Herbert Werner's memoir, published in 1969, devoted extensive passages to the terror of hearing torpedo motor noise approaching through the depths. Other survivors, interviewed by historians in subsequent decades, consistently described acoustic torpedo encounters as the most psychologically devastating experiences of their naval service. Kapitän Sir C. Peter Kremer, who survived as one of the few senior U-boat commanders to reach war's end, reflected in his 1984 memoir on the broader significance of FIDO. The acoustic torpedo represented more than another weapon. It represented the industrialized application of scientific principle to warfare in ways that rendered traditional military virtues insufficient. Courage, skill, discipline, all remained necessary, but they could not overcome fundamental technological disadvantage. The submarine had been the predator. Acoustic torpedoes made us the prey. This psychological reversal, from hunter to hunted, from predator to prey, characterized the broader transformation of German military fortunes after 1943. The technological confidence that had sustained early war successes dissolved when confronted with Allied industrial capacity and scientific innovation deployed at scales Germany couldn't match. FIDO represented one component of this larger pattern, but its impact on submarine operations made it among the most psychologically devastating. The statistical accounting of U-boat war provides context for understanding FIDO's strategic significance. Of approximately 1,180 U-boats commissioned during the war, 785 were destroyed. Acoustic torpedoes accounted for approximately 8 to 10% of total losses, a significant but not dominant proportion. Yet FIDO's influence exceeded its direct kill statistics through the operational constraints it imposed and the psychological impact it generated. U-boats that survived acoustic torpedo encounters returned to base with crews suffering psychological trauma that reduced combat effectiveness on subsequent patrols. Commanders who had experienced FIDO pursuit demonstrated measurably more cautious operational behavior, reducing aggressive prosecution of contacts in favor of defensive measures that prioritized survival over offensive action. This behavioral modification, multiplied across the U-boat force, reduced the threat submarines posed to Allied logistics even when boats remained operational. The post-war dispersal of German naval personnel included many former U-boat officers who entered civilian maritime industries. Their experience with acoustic torpedo warfare influenced commercial submarine design and underwater acoustic engineering in ways that persisted for decades. The understanding that noise propagates efficiently through water and can be detected at substantial distances, informed civilian applications ranging from underwater communication systems to marine biology research to oil exploration technology. The Allied scientists and engineers who developed FIDO moved into post-war careers that shaped late 20th century technology. The acoustic signal processing techniques pioneered for torpedo guidance found applications in sonar systems, seismology, medical ultrasonography, and eventually consumer electronics. The miniaturization of sensitive receivers and guidance systems contributed to the broader electronics revolution that transformed civilian life in developed nations. Western Electric, the primary manufacturer of Mark 24 torpedoes, applied production techniques and quality control procedures developed for FIDO manufacture to post-war telecommunications equipment. The precision machining, electronic assembly, and testing protocols established for acoustic torpedo production influenced the company's subsequent development of telephone switching systems and early computer hardware. The historical assessment of FIDO's contribution to Allied victory in the Battle of the Atlantic continues to evolve as additional documentation becomes declassified and accessible to researchers. Early post-war histories, written when acoustic torpedo technology remained classified, couldn't adequately describe the weapon's impact. Later analyses, with access to more complete records, have progressively elevated FIDO's significance in explaining the defeat of the U-boat campaign. The weapon didn't win the Battle of the Atlantic alone. Centimetric radar, improved convoy tactics, escort carrier deployment, increased shipbuilding capacity, ultra-intelligence, enhanced depth charges, Hedgehog anti-submarine mortars, all contributed to Allied victory. But FIDO represented a unique category of innovation, a weapon that specifically targeted the defensive doctrine U-boats relied upon for survival, a technology that eliminated the protection depth had always provided. When Lieutenant Commander William Ford released that first Mark 24 from his Liberator on May 14, 1943, he initiated a transformation in submarine warfare whose implications extended far beyond that specific engagement. The torpedo that followed U-640 down into the Atlantic depths carried more than 92 pounds of explosives. It carried the obsolescence of established doctrine, the invalidation of proven tactics, the demonstration that physics and engineering could eliminate advantages that seamanship and courage couldn't overcome. The crews of those U-boats lost to acoustic torpedoes died believing they had executed proper defensive procedures. They had crash-dived when aircraft appeared. They had conducted evasive maneuvers, they had gone deep and quiet. They had done everything correctly according to doctrine proven through years of successful operations. And they had died anyway, pursued by weapons they couldn't evade, guided by the sound of their own machinery, destroyed by technology whose existence they didn't know about until the final seconds, when understanding arrived simultaneously with detonation. That is the enduring legacy of FIDO, not merely the boats it sank or the men it killed, but the demonstration that in industrialized warfare, technological superiority can override tactical excellence, rendering obsolete not just specific weapons or platforms, but the entire doctrinal framework within which those weapons operate. The German U-boat crews learned this lesson in the depths of the Atlantic. They dove to escape, and FIDO followed them down. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.